The birthing ceremony of the HMHS Britannic. In the predicament time where a world war was on the horizon, a liner was about to be delivered in preparation for what was hoped for a long career on the transatlantic service. She was the jewel in the company's crown following her sister's sinking, yet they weren't prepared for what was to come. This is the story of the beginning of the third Olympic-class liner, the HMHS Britannic. Between 1903 and 1904, construction began on the Arrow gantries that were built at the North Yard on the waters of the Victoria Channel in Belfast, near the Harland and Wolff shipping offices. Upon construction, preparations were underway to build a new trio of liners for the British shipping company, the White Star Line. These were to become the Olympic-class liners, hulls 400, 401 and 433, later named the Olympic, the Titanic and the Britannic. The liners were constructed by the chief designer, Alexandra Carlisle, the head of the design department, Thomas Andrews Jr., and his assistant, Edward Wilding. The men began designing the ships on a set of blueprints in the drawing offices between 1903 and 1908. However, upon the construction of the gantries, Wilding went undercover where he made 2 visits to the John Brown Shipyard in Clydebank. Wilding would also travel on the Lusitania's 6th voyage in 1908, and he made notes to take back to Harland and Wolff. In December 1908, work began on the Olympic, and then the Titanic in March 1909. However, the Britannic's keel wasn't laid until the 30th of November 1911. By the 12th of March 1912, the Britannic's keel was framed to the height of the double bottom, but when the Titanic sank 1 month later, and in response, Edward Wilding, now the chief shipbuilder following the death of Thomas Andrews Jr., observed and likely made changes to the Britannic to make her safer, while following the new British Board of Trade regulations that would change in the aftermath of the British inquiry. When she was adjusted, the Britannic had a new inner skin fitted, reduced the size of the middle boiler in boiler room number 5, and additional regular and collapsible lifeboats, taking a total up to 55. She also had 5 gantries, 6 welin and 2 welin davits on her poop deck. A new bulkhead in the electric room, 5 bulkheads extending from E deck to B deck, and an increasing number of watertight compartments. Construction extended for a further 2 years before shipwrights took over to set to work at the bottom of the ship before the launch. Led by head shipwright Robert Leith, shipwrights had to remove the shores, bilge blocks and keel blocks before replacing a wooden cradle that would support the bows of a ship. This was no easy task, as the operation had to require an amount of concentration and teamwork, especially since there was no health and safety training. Keith would oversee the process of the shipwrights working along the whole length of the Britannic's keel, making certain sets of the blocks. The blocks were painted with red, white and blue paint. This indicated the order in which they were spilt out or removed from the slipway. Interestingly, the splinting out involved inserting a chisel in the cap piece of some of the blocks, and the wood would have been split away with sledgehammers before being painted red. On the day of the launch, shipwrights would have removed white and blue blocks by splitting them out, working their way from the stern to the bow and trying to complete the task before the rising water could catch up to the slipway. Also on the launchways, streams of tallow were painted on to allow the ship to move easily into the water. Tallow is a form of soap or oil that is made from a mixture of sperm whale and either rendered in beef or mutton fat. On the morning of the 26th of February 1914, a large crowd had gathered around Queen's Island to watch the launch of Hull 433, now named the Britannic. What they were about to witness was the ship sliding down slipway number 2 and taking her first steps in the water. It was a cold and drizzly day, though it didn't put people off from seeing the third mammoth liner. She waited patiently to be launched at 11:10 a.m. when the first warning rockets were launched. After the break of the first one, a second warning shot was fired, and Robert Keith, the head shipwright, would depress the lever inside an ample room to allow the launching triggers to drop and open a second valve which operated the hydraulic rams that were connected to the sliding ways. Travelling at 9.5 knots down the slipway, it took 81 seconds for the Britannic to hit the water. At the time of her launch, she weighed approximately 24,800 tonnes. Following the launch, the Britannic began her fitting out, and by September, her propellers were installed. However, by September, the First World War broke out, and as part of the war effort, Britannic was requisitioned into a hospital ship by the British government. Tragically, she sank off the Kia Channel on the 21st of November 1916 after she struck a mine.